So, very special guest, as you've already seen before. Brian Cross, name of the company, Sunbelt?
Sunbelt Business Advisors.
Sunbelt Business Advisors. He's actually working with one of my clients as we speak.
No names mentioned.
Yeah.
No names mentioned.
No names, but it's actively working together. And so when I saw what he was doing with my client, I was saying this would be terrific for you to review with 20 different contractors. Mm-hmm. How do you approach the sale of a construction business? What are you looking for? How does someone prepare? What are your expectations? And probably most important is how many of these companies actually sell. All right, loosely speaking. So, Brian Cross, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to ask you for a little bit of grace up front. As a couple of guys I was talking to, I'm a brain cancer survivor, and every now and then, gosh darn it, there's a word, I'm trying to get it out, and it's just stuck, all right? So if you see me grimacing with an awkward face, it means I'm trying to get a word or figure out an alternative on the fly, okay? And I will speak slowly because of some of that. We'll leave it at that. Questions are highly encouraged, and I was sitting through the last session, and I was happy to see that this crowd is not shy about asking questions. Okay. The title here is Valuing and Selling Construction Companies, but I understand somebody in the room is not in a construction company. The process is the same. This is really businesses with some tailored items to cover the construction side of things, okay? One of the other joys of being a brain cancer survivor, sometimes I'll, where to go, forget where I'm going. So here's my cheat sheet. All right. So what I'm going to do is start out with just an overview of what we're going to talk about today. And I live in what I call 90% rules, because there's always variations. Your situation won't be exactly like their situation, and so on and so forth. Right? So what I'll be discussing today, I know some of you will scratch your head and say, but wait a minute, what about this or that? And those are the 10% rules, okay? So everything I say comes along with the 90% rule case, okay? I want to go through the concept for you guys, and some of you are thinking, we're not even thinking about selling. Well, you should be well ahead of the time that you do, and we'll talk about that. So the planning preparations, the process itself, I'll try to keep that brief. I would try to focus a little bit more on the valuation and how that's determined, because that's probably what's most important to you guys. And then just some, after the sale, what to expect, and some final points. Well, all right. Okay, so the lack of planning is the most common error that we see. And if any of you guys are readers, I'm sure David encourages you to. There's probably, you're aware of Stephen Covey, right? 7 Habits, highly successful people. One of his primary tenets is begin with the end in mind. And I've been doing the sales of businesses in Colorado since 1997. And I would say, if I had to guess, 5% of the folks that come to us have really planned for their exit and really optimized that and gotten help and guidance. We've had people call us and say, I'm ready to sell because they had a bad day. They had like their 3rd employee for the week quit or whatever it is, and they get me out, you know. So, yeah, yes, really. Okay, you'll see in the valuation part, the section, that the most important period for the valuation side, and James is in the back, and I'm glad he's going after me because he's going to talk to you about the SBA lending process, and he's going to correct everything I say. Only believe him about 50% though. Okay. All right. So one of the things when it comes to planning preparation, and they're much more, but we're limited on time. These are things that just popped in my mind because I know it's applicable to you guys. Equipment purchases, right? Well, and a lot of you guys probably sub out, a lot of you, God bless you. I was working with a guy who had a septic business, contacted me, wanted to sell, and 6 months before he contacted me, he bought almost $200,000 truck, state of the art for his industry. And as you'll learn in the evaluation section, it's probably a bad move because really the contribution to value is going to be based primarily on the earnings, and he has not had enough time to increase his earnings. It was just a bad move. One question, one phone call would have taken care of, right? So, we see, again, lack of planning, right? This one's fun. I did a seminar, 20 years ago or so in Denver, and I looked around and I said, okay, is anybody here from the IRS? And it's exactly what happened. People say, look around and chuckling, like, I know where this is going. Right? So we like to talk about, we try to be polite, we just label it a very aggressive interpretation of the tax laws. Some business owners are more aggressive with their interpretation than others. So my favorite story is I was working with an underground utility company, and he had a Harley Davidson on his balance sheet. So it didn't take, it's common sense. I could talk to a buyer and tell him that, you really don't need a Harley, to lay underground utility lines. So I said, but the lender, and James will correct me here, may have a different approach, because if it's on your tax return and that's expensive, that's what they're going to look at, right? So you're dealing with, again, lack of planning, right? Which is fine to have that there. What I told everybody when I said, is there any IRS agents in the room, is that we know what you do. We see it every day. Part of our process is a financial review. I see a Navy hat. You're on thin ice with me. I'm an Air Force guy, so I just noticed it. Sorry about that. There we go. There's that brain thing. Somebody bring me back. We know what you do, IRS. But so here's what we say, off the record. Keep doing what you're doing. Maximize what you put in your pocket. The risk is on you. Right, in doing that. But in the final 3 years before you sell, clean it up, right? And that's the closest thing you're going to get to the best of both worlds. Right? So, and I have people that resist that so much, they hate the idea of paying taxes. And, do the math, right? For lack of an in-depth analysis, your valuation of your business is going to be a multiple of your earnings, your reported earnings, right? So, and provable earnings. So you're going to get, for lack of a better term, say 3 times that number. So for every $1 that you have buried, that could have been $3. Now you save, depending on your tax bracket, 35 cents. But 35 cents versus $3, and I've had people say, and I know it's a little more complicated than that because then you can pay taxes on that $3. The math still is clear that clean it up over the last 3 years and be happy and pay as much taxes as you can.
You're talking about EBITDA, earnings before that.
You're jumping ahead of me. And I'd like to see, Brian, that you spell it with an I. These guys with the Y don't know what they're doing. We will hit that in valuation section. These last two go together, and these are just, again, there's more that could be in each of these slides, but we only have a certain amount of time. The problem is what will make your business more difficult to sell is when you are the business, right? Because I had one, I'll tell you, we have, I'll get into our process. We have a very high success rate on the companies that we list. And I have one that I couldn't sell because he was the business. The owner was the business. And even his website, he's like the master and, you know, all this. I made him change his website after the, 14th buyer or whatever. So one of the ways to get through that is developing systems and processes, and I'm sure that David has beat that into you guys. If you haven't read Michael Gerber's E-Myth Revisited, is great if you can get over the fact that it's a pie shop he uses as an example. The other thing is pretty much an update. Some of you guys may know Gino Wickman, Traction. That's a good book, and he's basically taken a lot of the some stuff from E-Myths, from different. He's compiled info and added his touch to it. But and I'm sure some of you guys have things that can encourage. You can encourage me with other books that you've read, right? One thing to add though about systems and processes, so that it makes your business more scalable. It should make your business more profitable. I'm a restless person. I like to be super busy, and so I've also owned a couple of businesses. So one of the things that I've done to be able to own a couple of businesses and continue to sell businesses is to be able to put systems and processes in place so that when whoever it is in a position and they leave, it's always a sad time when you lose a key person, right? But if you have something in writing, forgive me, I'll go back to my military days, where we have standardization eval, we call it stand eval inspections. One of the things that they did for every position, you had a pilot position and then you had an in-squadron role. And at the time of that inspection, I was a scheduler. And the concept was that when I went out and flew that day, if I didn't come back, somebody could pick up my notebook and carry on and do the job just as well as I could. All right, so if you think of that in your business, not only does it make more scalable, because no longer do you have to hire somebody at this level, you have to hire somebody who can read and implement the process that you developed, but it also makes your business more attractive to a buyer that comes in and you say, here's the process for this position, this role, and one of the things that I learned in the company, oh, I guess I can't do that. Mitchell's back there laughing at me. Is you can hire a lower skill set to complete the job and train them along the way. Now, it takes, here's the struggle. I taught a class years ago, just a small business class, and I told them at the end of the night, we had 74 people in the room. At the end of the night, I said, I'm going to follow one of you out to your car, and I'm going to ask you to open up the trunk of your car. But I'm going to tell you now what I'm going to find in your trunk. And everybody got the, what? I said, it's going to be a big rolled up white hose and a red hat that's about this big long. I said, because I know most of you are running from fire to fire, right? And so a lot of people say, well, to build the systems, it takes time. Yes, it does, right? And stealing Michael Gerber's line, that's time working on your business instead of working in your business. And to me, when people say they don't have time, it's the guy in the who's fallen off the boat and is in the ocean, and they throw him a life ring and it lands 10 feet away, and they're like, swim to, and he said, no, I can't do it. I'm too busy, staying afloat. It's like, well, you're just going to be doing that until you burn out, and in his case, until he goes underwater, right? So, it's I encourage people to take, make dedicated time, every Saturday or once a month even, right? So, anyway, enough on that. But document your systems and processes. Okay, the sales process is really the same. And like I said, for whether it's construction business or anything else, I've heard people say, well, how many of this businesses have you sold? How many of this type of business have you sold? And we tell them as honestly as much as we can remember after doing it for 26 years. I've sold everything from a dental practice to a steel foundry. And that's the range of stuff that I use, because I haven't seen everything, but we've seen a lot. And even between those two things, the overall process is the same. Now, how you go about applying the process, that's where there's some nuances. And I can only tell you how we do it compared to a lot of people. I won't say everyone. When I started, I was taught list 20 companies, expect to sell 4 or 5 of them. And I didn't know, I was a new guy. So we started that process. I made it maybe 9 months before I tore that script up and threw it away. I hated the people that are calling. I take it personally if I list somebody's company. It's kind of a promise that you're going to do everything you can to sell that company. And you have to deal with the calls from the 15 or so that were had unrealistic on their value expectations, etc. And you went ahead and listed it anyway. So we switched that process, and now our process is, instead of listing 20 companies, list 5 and expect to sell 4, hopefully in a good year 5. Right? And it frees up my time, frees up to do other business activities. I sleep better, I don't make promises I can't keep, those kinds of things. So the way we do it that's different is we invest time up front. Well, I call it a front-end loaded process. So with no charge to the client, we will go in, we'll get, at this point, because I've been doing it 26 years, most of what I do is a referral from somebody that, hey, you sold to so-and-so. And so we will have, let's see, how much is up there? Okay, initial business, familiarization, basic relationship building. Years pre-COVID, that was almost always in person. A lot of times I'd meet, can't tell you how many, the smile just came, how many back offices I've been in people's businesses. And the ones, I'm a reader, so the ones that had books lined up, you guys, I heard a lot about building relationships, right? One of the best ways to build relationships is to find common ground. So I could look at, somebody who had books on their shelf and guarantee that I've read at least 1 or 2 of them, and I'd go, hey, I like this, I got this specific point out of that, and had a bond. But the reason I smiled is this one thing stuck with me. I was in somebody's office, and there was a poster of John Wayne standing like John Wayne stands, and the caption said, "Life is tough, but it's tougher if you're stupid." And that just stuck with me, more than 20 years. Every now and then I'll see somebody do something, and I'm like, it's tough enough. It's hard enough. And it's mostly self-inflicted. That's why the Darwin Awards exist. Okay. So there's an initial meeting to build some chemistry and learn about the business in general. And it's also the beginning for us of our interview process. Because of the people we talk to, we might list 1 out of 4 of those rough numbers. So we're pre-qualifying them to see if they fit in our box as a client, okay? Because we're not there to gather listings. We want to sell businesses, and yes, sir.
So what do you look for when you come in? I mean, what are the things that, because you're coming in, you're interviewing them.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you immediately trying to?
The overall one is, if I can't trust somebody, if I come out of that meeting and go, yuck, like you're trying to get it off, that was a slimy character. How am I going to convince, and I don't even consider it convincing, but how am I going to get a buyer who's putting, in a lot of cases, it's their biggest investment, it's one of their biggest financial decisions. So I'm trying to gather some idea on character and trustworthiness, and I've gotten it wrong a couple of times, and it's been bad, but that's high level. And then the number one question that everyone's going to ask: why are you selling this business? We're looking at how great it is. You're growing. What's causing you to want to sell? And do I believe the answer when they come back with it? Right? So it's more of a general feel of, okay, is this trustworthy? Is this somebody that a buyer is going to be comfortable working with? Because there has to be chemistry between the buyers. I did a little work in the investment banking side of the world, and I was surprised to learn that a lot of the deals didn't go to the highest bidder. They went to the better fit. And a lot of that was chemistry, synergies, etc.
Well, it's really no different than what we do every day. You're going in and interviewing your client and making sure that, we're going to marry you for the next 3-4 weeks.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, 5 months.
Where'd you come in from, sir?
Where am I from? Yeah, Massachusetts.
Yeah, I was born and raised in New York, so I have an ear for the East Coast, right? My favorite Super Bowl commercial was, "They parked the car." Very similar. And that's really sales 101, right? Is finding parallel. I was with somebody one time and talking to someone, and it's like, oh yeah, we know about this, so-and-so. And the guy that was with me, after that person left, total stranger, he says, you have something in common with everyone. I said, so do you? I said, I'm just in the habit of, I call it, I have a bunch of radar or military analysis. I call it radar. You're on broad sweep initially, looking for commonality. For me, if I find out I had a potential client, one of the other businesses I own is a landscaping company, and I showed up and the client, her hair was falling out, and she was under treatment. Talk about relatability. My gosh, So, after she had some time to recover, because those projects, especially the larger ones, sometimes go over a year. There was a period where I didn't see her, and when I did see her, probably improper to say, but she looked like a chia pet, but her hair was all coming back. And I almost ran up and hugged her, because we had that relationship. So you have something in common with everybody. You just got to look for it. And I have a few go-tos. If you're not a Broncos fan, the Navy. I do the military thing. Those kinds of things. But what's it?
Seahawks.
Oh, all right, I think we're done here. All right, okay. And I've given Mitchell instructions to just wave me off if we're going over time. All right. So The initial part here is after, that chemistry is doing a focused evaluation, not valuation, evaluation of the financials. And what we're looking for in that request is essentially 3 years, P&Ls and balance sheets. We're not asking for tax returns up front because there's more data we can pull out of the P&Ls and balance sheets. And we always say if we go forward, because at this point I haven't committed to taking them on as a listing, if we go forward, we're going to request your business tax returns as well. So 3 years and then the current interim comparison. So in that case, this year would be, I would request January through August 23 and January through August 22, so I can see how things are going, right? And then, some businesses that are more like highly seasonal will ask for monthly sales reports to be able to chart and graph seasonality, that kind of stuff. But that gives us enough information to start that deep dive in. And what I tell the seller in that initial meeting, I said, you and I are going to work to come up with a number that we can support, both of us. And we'll agree on that number, and then I'll go from there as to what we think the value is and the range of it. And that range, estimated value range, is just that. Anybody, when I got out of the Air Force, one of the first things I did was worked in the commercial real estate appraisal world. And anybody who implies like pinpoint accuracy on the range of your business, which so much of the value is intangible, is not being wholly truthful. Okay? Yes, sir.
Do you pull out owner's compensation and all those things that are associated with the owner when you're doing evaluation?
Absolutely. For a single active owner. But you jumped ahead. I'll move faster to try to get there. After we come back with that multiple, or excuse me, with that value range that we get, that's our, by the way, during that process, it's not just hand us the stuff and we'll get back to you on Tuesday. A lot of times it's, hey, I see, and I always ask, please put it in Excel, because then we can compare and notice, how come your marketing costs tripled? And what's up with your rent? Is this other income? Is that from a PPL or an idle or a PPP loan has been repaid, et cetera, et cetera. So it's interactive. There's always Q&A back and forth, so we can get the most accurate picture. If I don't go there, so remind me when we get to the valuation. Yeah. What going to the market looks like used to be, we post ads in the local newspaper. In 1997, that's what there was. Now we post on one site, and we have someone who then takes that post and clones it onto 8 other sites on the website. So everything is done electronically. Buyer screening. So I currently, and for the last 15 years, I've worked with one partner at the firm. We used to have 6 brokers, and that whole thing changed when September 11th hit and the towers went down. The banks pulled all their chips off the table. James may remember back then. So we went ahead and just refined what we're doing. And this partner of mine, he was brought on initially just to do the buyer screening, because the statistics are that we will have to screen between 15 and 20 buyers to sell a business. And our goal, one thing to mention there, unlike the real estate world where they want to have an open house, get as many people through the door, hope somebody falls in love with the kitchen, we're just the opposite. We want to screen away as many people we think of who aren't qualified, or we want to limit. The process results from a seller standpoint that they'll meet 2 to 3 buyers So we'll go through 15 to 20, and some business, forgive me for saying it, but honesty is honesty. You didn't pick the easiest industry in terms of selling your businesses. So on some of those, we go 15 to 20, may look more like 25 to 30 or so that we'll have to go through to do this. Right? I just closed the deal last Friday, and it was the third buyer that he had interacted with, so, which is pretty common. Confidentiality, yes, sir.
Sorry, just a quick question.
Yeah.
For you. 'Cause I back in the day, used to mess around a little bit with houses,
Yeah.
residential. But one of the things we tried to never do was have buyer meet seller, buyer meet the owner of the property. But in your business, I imagine it'd be pretty important for them to do that.
Yeah. In terms of our process, what'll happen, so that partner who was brought on to do all that initial screening still does that. So that frees me up of a lot of my time. And then businesses of a certain size and above come to me, and those below he takes and runs with, okay? In the process of him doing that screening, somebody will inquire off of one of the internet posts, and he will say, "Hey, great, tell me a little bit about yourself." And he said, "That sounds good. This is something." He may give him a snippet, a little bit more of the generic stuff that was put online, so that to maintain confidentiality. And then he said, "Great, I'm going to send you a non-disclosure agreement and your buyer's profile, which includes your financial balance sheet, your personal balance sheet, essentially." That's kind of a screening process. We've had people to send back the confidentiality agreement and not send back the financial profile, and we put them on the back of the pile, right? And a lot of times and I realize meeting with the client, I'll get there. So once he does the screening, so if I'm the lead on that business, he will say he knows enough about the business to be able to give some general info. And if that buyer's interested, then he introduces them to me. And we have a phone call with that buyer. We do a lot of sales with out-of-state buyers. So the buyer-seller first meeting doesn't happen a lot with, now if somebody flies in for that meeting, the odds are this is a pretty good fit already, right? Taking that commitment. Right? But anyway, so what'll happen is then that buyer will talk to me, we'll go through all of his Q&A. He's hoping I skipped one part. Right here, this marketing package. After we do an engagement agreement, then we build a package that has the history of the business, its financial trending, what's going on, summary of financials, calculation of the earnings, seller's discretionary earnings that we'll talk about. So they now, if they've signed confidentiality and proven their financial viability, they will have that package. So they'll come to me and ask questions about things that are in the package, this trending. Tell me a little bit about the seller. Why are they really selling? We put in something, we may put in the ad, pursue other ventures or something pretty generic, But they'll have a conversation with me, and then based on the results of that conversation, that's when we connect. If it goes well, that's when we connect with the seller. And that meeting is really mostly a chemistry meeting because they've already asked all of their questions about the business. And the way we do our process, we understand the financials in the initial evaluation, and then building that marketing summary is a very collaborative process. I'll do a draft of something and send it off, and you'll correct, and highlight areas, fill in this blank, when you started, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. So that's one way to filter down how many buyers the seller has to deal with. Now, yes, we do, but it's not you're interested? Great, let me schedule an appointment. Because could be a waste of time with the seller and frankly of my time. We call it being ambitiously lazy, because, we try to tailor the process. Okay, but we do the site visit, that initial meeting that you're talking about a lot now, we do on Zoom. The world is, or GoToMeeting or some online, for a first meeting. Some people want that step first, and then site visit, if applicable, after hours. I work a lot of weekends, a lot of evenings, because that's when the employees aren't around. All right. And then, my mission is to guide, because there really isn't a buyer's broker out there. And it's another conversation we can talk about. The math doesn't work very well for that. So in my case, I work for the seller. I've always represented the seller. My fiduciary responsibility is to the seller. That said, most of your buyers have not gone through this process before, so they need help understanding what the process is, recommendations to lenders, etc. So we call it guiding a buyer, and a lot of times the buyer will send us a letter of intent as a draft to review, knowing, because we've disclosed to them that we represent the seller, but we can look at some things, and I can say, based on the review, this looks good, but number 12, that's a little, you're pushing it. By law, I have to submit it if you want me to, but you have to understand, this is not a house. You're not, I bought the house, here's the keys, the former owner's out and gone. There's a relationship after the sale. And, so a prudent buyer is aware of that, and they're gonna act in a way to keep that in mind. If they come in, we know it all, real aggressive or something, it usually doesn't go well.
And Brian, are you dealing a lot with attorneys for the buyer?
Yes and no. That's in a later portion, but I'll answer now. Our biggest fear is, so a lot of times the seller has an attorney already that they've been working with over years. A lot of times buyers do not. So we'll recommend attorneys who have done transactions. Our biggest fear is when we hear, my brother-in-law is a divorce attorney in Toledo, and he's going to help me. And that added 30 to 60 days to the closing, and I always and increased legal costs. I always tell people, you don't want to pay for your attorney's education to doing deals. So yes, but selectively is the answer to that question. All right. Car keys, anyone? I'm going to put those over here so I don't do that again.
Brian, the LOI, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Letter of intent. So that's the first. Do any of you use Excel? Microsoft Excel? To me, that's an if-then statement. What I mean by that is, if everything you told me is true, broker and seller, then I'll buy your business for X, subject to confirming that everything you told me is true, right? So it's a way to avoid doing all the due diligence and a lot of work and find out that you're not even in agreement on the sales price, right? So it's high level, key terms, it's non-binding except for certain clauses, confidentiality, et cetera, and that's basically, it's an offer for the business contingent on a buyer doing due diligence, getting financing to their, that's acceptable to them, leases, et cetera, yeah. So that's the goal. I find from letter of intent to selling in terms of people maybe versus someone doing a letter of intent and dropping out, we're between 80 and 90% of if they had that letter of intent. And we love buyer who has just missed out on 2 or 3 other opportunities because somebody else stepped in and got that. Because one of the things that comes with the letter of intent that's protection for the buyer is we call it a no-shop clause. We define a reasonable period to do due diligence, obtain financing, etc., and we will not offer the business to any other buyers. All right, so that's helpful. Yes.
Is there a typical profile of a buyer for our industry?
Yes. Like I said, I have a bad expression, I call it gun ahead. If you put a gun ahead in my head and ask me to answer that question without any time to think through it, I would say it's someone with experience or related experience to what you're doing outside of your market. So a lot of the construction-related businesses, because somebody who's another builder doesn't want to pay anything for your goodwill, for your knowledge, because they have their knowledge and they think they have enough of it. So someone who wants to get to Colorado, I always use this example that I feel bad for the poor schlep in my position who lives in Newark, New Jersey, because no one wants to move to Newark, New Jersey to buy a business, right? But we live in Colorado and people want a reason to come here. So a lot of times we'll sell to someone who has related building, remodeling experience from outside. You can broaden that. David, did you have something? No. Okay, I saw he scratches his ear. I don't know if that was a signal. Carol Burnett, did you ever hear that? Yeah, it was like something to her grandmother or something. That was her little thing, her little signal or something. That was cool. Okay. All right, I'm on the next slide, but you're not. Anybody? You guys have the slides in your notebook. Let's keep going while we're here. Okay, the next one is evaluation. This is kind of where we want to focus. This is not a class on valuation, all right, because you can really get into the weeds. There's one component, though, at valuation that I want you guys to understand because we get the question a lot, right? So there are 3 approaches to valuation, and a professional, I think there's been a change, but yes, sir.
Brian, in your notes, there's one slide, I think, before that.
Oh, that could be.
It said the 4 major items.
Oh, well, there you go. See, I told you, all the Brians with the eyes are sharp, so. Okay, these 4, this is kind of the final part of the process. After the LOI is signed, there are essentially, in most cases, 4 processes, big picture processes that need to go simultaneously, all right? One is buyer securing financing, all right? Most of the deals, there will be SBA financing, but when you're in the market, and James is here to talk about that, when you're in the market long enough, you'll see swings. And right now we're in one where the swing is the interest rate right now. I've seen 10.5%, in that range, right? So on one of the businesses I just bought, I made the seller carry a reasonable piece at 6% because I wasn't going to pay that rate on that whole thing, okay? So right now, we're a little and in a bit of an anomaly because of the high interest rates, okay? Seller financing, it's rare. Most sellers, for obvious reasons, don't want to do it, but I have one right now that we're closing on the 1st of October because of his aggressive interpretation of the tax laws. cannot get financing from a lender because he's hidden his income well. So he's doing a complete, no lender involved, complete seller finance deal.
Are we still on valuation slide one?
No, I'm sorry. The sales process post LOI,
Okay.
page 5.
Got it.
Slide 5. All right. So of the 4 components, and these go on simultaneously, we're getting back.
Not yet.
There's the due diligence. Remember the if-then statement. So the buyer goes into verification of what they choose to do for due diligence. And I have seen deals where buyers have done none. They've taken what we've given them and said, okay, I'm good, let's do this, which is rare. I have seen an 18-page due diligence checklist that was ridiculous, and he copied it, had to copy it from somewhere, and didn't have the sense. Well, I talked to him, I said, if you want to submit this, you can, because they sent it to me first. I said, but I can see, 2/3 of this doesn't apply. And remember, you want to keep a good relationship, Mr. Buyer, with the seller of the business, okay? So, but I always tell with the LOI process, I tell buyers in their due diligence, think of it in terms of traffic lights. If you're looking at something, the light's green, move on to the next. If the light turns yellow, slow down, dig deeper. And if you get to a point where the light is red, if that can't be resolved, then you're done. And you move on unless the seller is willing to acknowledge that. And we've had times during due diligence where something was found and there were adjustments to the LOI that, obviously the seller has to agree to that in order to make those kind of adjustments. There's the legal documentation portion. So there's where your attorneys come in. It's not just the sale. Attorneys sometimes have the reputation of being deal killers. Not ones who do a lot of deals. It's someone who's only done a few deals, who seems to have the chip on their shoulder, and you get back we're back in action. That's the Mike Tyson quote. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
I wasn't quite going to go there.
So sorry, I didn't know there were guidelines here, or guardrails, so I had to say it. Okay, we good?
He's going to be your clicker. So
Okay.
every time you go to the next slide, just let him know, and we're going to just manually advance it.
That's fine. Yeah. And then the last one, the reason is the landlord. A lot of times, there is a lease transfer. Most have a leased facility. Sometimes it's owner occupied, but they don't want to sell. That's a good time in terms of a lease because you got a cooperative landlord because they want their business sold. But on the deal I told you I just closed Friday, when the paperwork was given to the landlord, she said, no, I don't think I'll sign this. I don't see any gain in this for me.
Oh my God.
And if you think about it, they're the only one in this whole equation that has nothing to gain. They've got a tenant that's been there for X number of years, they're familiar with, they've paid, et cetera, et cetera. So there's really no upside. So I asked the question, I said, because I didn't have a copy of the lease, has anybody reviewed the transfer language in the lease, and does the following phrase exist? Not to be unreasonably withheld. And I got back, it's there. And like, okay, there we go. Let's go back to the landlord, who then had to, because this buyer was very qualified to buy this business. So she would have invited, it was a woman at the time, would have invited a lawsuit for being unreasonable withheld. So there's a tip. In your lease, if you don't have it, if you get it, make sure you're language in your lease is not to be, includes in the transfer clauses, not to be unreasonably withheld.
SDE,
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what? We're going there now, but it'll be the slide after this next one, but it stands for seller's discretionary earnings, and we'll talk about that. Please. Okay, it's true. Your business is worth what somebody will pay for it. But our advantage, and the market dictates what that is. Our advantage is we live in the market. So we see that day in and day out. We know the components. We know what the lender uses for debt coverage ratios, et cetera, that plays into the valuation. And I can tell in over 90% of cases, somebody says, okay, this is the industry I'm in. This is the size of what I'm doing. This is the amount I'm making on the bottom line. I can give you a reasonable value, range of value, all right? Because it's standardized by the market. The guys that don't get it are the ones who come to me after they've been talking to somebody for the last 9 months that went to sell their business on their own, and they were dealing with one person who was interested in the buyer or in the business. And we have a saying that one buyer is no buyer, because they control everything. They control the timing, the information that they want, etc. There's no one to put their feet to the fire because they know no one else is even looking at the business. So, okay. So there are 3 approaches to value, and like I said, this is not an appraisal class, but every professional appraiser has guidelines, and they have to consider, it doesn't matter if we're talking house, residential apartment complex, your business, equipment, they have to consider those 3 approaches. So the market approach is also known as the sales comparison approach. Cost approach is exactly that. What did it cost to get you where you are, and then with calculation of reasonable depreciation. And then the income approach is going to be, for those of you who are math prolific, we'll use the word, that is so if you're in a real estate, I know some of you do some real estate work, because anybody in the construction world seems to have a few houses or something on the side. So you're probably familiar with cap rates, right? So you know what the cap rates are, and you watch them as they go up and down in the industry that you're investing in, whether it's multi-unit housing, etc. But you consider all the approaches, and then you weight, like W-E-I-G-H-T. You don't wait on them. You weight based on what you're, as a professionally trained appraiser, what you're going to put the most weight on. And in some cases, like when I would look at a business, I would say, if we were doing a formal appraisal, I would say, okay, here's the cost approach, and really, frankly, I give that 0 weight. On a business, here's the income approach, I'd probably give that about 90% of the weight. And then sales comparison, I'll mine some databases to see what's out there, but these are not publicly traded companies. This is your companies, right? They're not, you don't know what's in that information. You don't know if there was seller carry. You don't know if there was some lease concessions to get the deal done. There's a lot involved that you just don't know. So you've got to look at the data, and hopefully you'll have enough that you can scrap the top 5 and the bottom 5 and get some averages to work with. But it's really more of a sanity check, because the buyer of a business is really most concerned with what their return is going to be. Right? Similar in a property world of buying an apartment complex. You don't really care how much it costs to have the building built. You care what the rent roll is and what your expenses are going to be. And in our world, the cap rate, mathematical inverse of the cap rate is the multiple that we use. So your income. All right, so but here's what you need to get. 1 second, go back. This is the whole reason I even include this. You can't combine these. So what that means, what the guy with the sewer business, right, his earnings were X, and I said, based on X, this is the valuation range, the initial valuation range of your business. He goes, well, what about the value of the truck? I said, that's a different approach. You can't add that on top of it. All right, so they're separate approaches, and that's why it was a mistake for him to buy that truck so close to the time he wanted to sell, because there wasn't long enough for him to increase his income as a result of having that truck. One of my favorite stories was when I first came up to Denver, we sold a 105-year-old badge and trophy shop. And it was the father-son who were running it. And the son said, I gave him the value, and he said, we're 105 years old. There's got to be more value because of that. I said, no. I said, you're 105 years old, and that you should be able to leverage to get more business, which would increase your earnings, which would increase your value. So,
On the comment regarding the truck, does it matter whether or not that asset was owned outright, or was the issue that you had a loan on the truck?
It matters to him. It does not impact the value at all. It impacts what he can walk away from the day of sale. So if he had it debt-free, other than taxes, the rest of it's to him. But in this case, because in 9 times out of 10, in almost all of, more than 9 times, we're looking at asset sales versus stock sales. So I'm assuming everyone here, especially if they've been talking to David for any period of time, there's an entity created that you do your business under that entity, S Corp, LLC, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you don't own any of the assets of your business. You own the entity. So what's going to happen is the buyer is going to create their own entity, and then in the legal documents, you're going to give your entity consent to sell. Buyer's going to give their entity consent to purchase, and that entity buys the assets from your entity, versus a stock sale where a buyer comes in and buys your company, XYZ Inc., and then the rules are different. So in that case, in a pure stock sale, whatever it is in the bank, debt, cash, etc., it just flows over, doesn't change. In the asset sale, unless it's negotiated separately, definitely within 90% rules, the assets are transferred free and clear.
So in the sale of a home, all the liens and encumbrances are paid off. In the sale of a business, does the new owner assume the loans?
No. Well, in a lot of cases, for like SBA loans, I'm not even sure they're assumable. But the answer is no. If it's an asset sale, it's free and clear. So typically, the seller keeps cash and accounts receivable, we can come back to that in a second, and pays off all liabilities. So buyer would get that truck. Yeah.
I don't want to go buy 5 new trucks.
Correct.
Years from when
Correct.
I sell my business.
Exactly.
Pay cash.
Exactly. Receivables. Hopefully, any construction-related company, especially commercial, and I think pretty much everybody here is more residential, they tend to be slower pay receivables than a typical business. So cash flow tends to be an issue. So it's not uncommon, either I see James nodding his head, it's not uncommon for a buyer to A, get some working capital in their loan, but B, to negotiate a portion, at least. For instance, one of the small businesses I just bought, it included in the sale price $50,000 of first in, what I call first. So the next receivable that comes in comes to me until we hit 50,000, and then whatever's left goes to the seller for working.
Or exclusions on receivables that you think are collectible.
Absolutely. That's why it's first in, and they were well over 50,000, and I don't have to chase, any of the slow payers. They stay with the
How
seller.
does the seller go about, so let's say it's $100,000 in receivable, you're due the first 50, the next 50 comes in, but he no longer owns the company. They're sending a check to you.
We worked it out ahead of the deal. I have an advantage when I buy a business because I've been doing the selling of business for 20-some years. So the day prior to closing, the end of the day, we had a list of all of the receivables outstanding. And then we checked them off as they came in with the commitment that we shared a P.O. box because we didn't want anything to change from the outside looking in, and that's where all their checks were being sent to. And then we just cooperated back and forth. We'd update the list. It started out as 50, and then, here there were 19,000 that came in. Here's which invoices were paid. I'm an Excel guy, so it's just a matter of tracking and communicating. But there still has to be some level of trust between the buyer and seller. Right? Yes, sir.
Interesting note, my brother-in-law's son, who took over or bought the business from my brother. They're in industrial safety supply. He's grown it to like $500 million in revenue, and he was an M&A attorney, mergers and acquisitions. What he does when he's interested in acquiring a business, he'll give the buyer the valuation models and say, which one do you like the most as a starting point for getting into what do you feel most comfortable with, and let's see what kind of deal we can put together.
We can go, yeah. Cool.
What happens to liabilities? So you talked about the receivables. What about payables or any other kind of liability?
Assuming an asset purchase, that's why if you're the buyer, you set up a new corporation, and as of the date of sale, so if you're talking about liabilities, just accounts payable, that's dealt with prior to or at closing. So there's I'm putting a settlement statement together right now for a business that's going to sell on October 1st, and I'm getting the prorations and outstanding liabilities, and the seller either has to pay and prove that they paid the outstanding liabilities before or at closing, or everything's running through my escrow account, and I'll disperse and pay them off out of the closing proceeds.
And does that affect the sale price? Your valuation, like if you're going on the income approach? It does not.
It does not. It does not. Like I said, it affects what the seller keeps. So the seller, people say, hey, my business is debt free. Well, it doesn't increase your valuation, but it does help. I came up with we had a specialty publishing business, and it was the valuation I gave him was in the $2.5 million range, and it was a husband and wife situation. And she said, "We can't retire on that." And I had to go into careful explanation of the amount you need to retire is not connected to the value of your business. I said, but where the connection is, you may not be able to afford to sell right now, and if this is what you need, we can reverse engineer for you what your business needs to look like in order to get that price. And we've done that, a fair amount of times, and very few people go through with it because they'll light up. We can do that, and then 6 months later, they're like, "We just want to get out." I'm like, "Okay, then it's 2.5." We have had some good successful cases.
What about ongoing projects that?
Work in process. Yep, absolutely. You guys especially will have that. Thankfully, the business I sold on Friday, sometimes they're, I sold earlier this year a company that got dual citizenship. They happen to focus on Italy, U.S. and Italy. They had about 140 cases at the time of sale that had to be looked at for work in process. Right? Thankfully, what I learned, most of the construction folks, they'll have 2 projects or 3 projects that we can look at and agree how much. You got to look at, has any money been collected on this project already? How much of the project has been done? What's outstanding? And when there's only 3 or 4, and that's where there's got to be some chemistry involved. We can come to an agreement that, okay, this one is 50% through, this one's not even started, but you got cash. That has to go to the buyer because they're going to incur all the costs with that. This one you're almost finished up with, et cetera. We'll give you 90% on that. So they're work in process allocations.
So I see a lot of kind of slippery slopes as far as all that goes. All of your vendors, for instance, your relationship with them, where do you flip the switch?
On the closing date. Okay, so we'll talk about some of that in the transition. My clicker left, but
One negotiation that a general contractor, and he was a big commercial outfit, but he had maybe 5 big projects going. He said that my valuation, these will come in at or certain gross margin.
Yeah.
And that's, so as long as we deliver these, or they do finish out as I have budgeted and projected, then I get a higher premium. So
Yeah.
there was some contingency.
Sure.
If they didn't perform.
well, on that kind of stuff, you as for me, my focus is try to structure any of that in a win-win scenario, right? So, in that, I'm back in action. Wow.
You just voted out.
I did.
Okay. Yep. All right. I'll put this in my pocket. SDE versus EBITDA. You've heard a lot. The real difference between EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxation, depreciation, and amortization. All right. SDE stands for seller's discretionary earnings. The main difference is cost of management. Within an EBITDA, you're assuming that the management cost is included, so you will end up paying for a higher multiple than you will on an SDE sale calculation because the SDE includes the owner's compensation.
Could you back up and say that again? So,
Seller's discretionary
Earnings, yes. And that is what 90% of the businesses, let's say, that sell up to, like this one that we just did that we closed was just over 3 million. It's an SDE calculation. When you start getting into the bigger companies, I laugh because I look at, sometimes I'll see what's on Biz Buy Sell or one of the more active listing company, online companies, and I'll see somebody that say, and it's got an EBITDA of $90,000. And, we don't even look at EBITDA until it's 500,000 or above. And even then it's a tweener. Then we kind of look at how it's being run, whether it's a Main Street business or a mid-market business, and those are just terms. Right?
is my salary,
Yeah.
I vote to pay myself part of my discretionary income.
So how is it determined? So to keep it apples to apples, it's a single active owner. So that means if there's a husband and wife, and as most common, don't get mad at me, ladies, most common, the wife is in an admin role and the husband is, we're assuming that the buyer will take over the husband's role. And then we put a cost in for replacement of the wife's role in that scenario. Now, I've seen it the other way around, where we've taken the husband's role and put in place, but we're looking at, because any active buyer's looking at 4 different businesses, trying to decide, and it's the industry way of comparing apples to apples, okay? And then from there, so where we start is the net income, okay? So where we get a lot of people that don't understand is they'll say, but I also took a $150,000 draw this year. And I say, great, where is it on the P&L? I said, what do you mean? I said, because that shows up on your balance sheet. But if we're starting on the net income, the only thing that can be added back are expenses above that that result in the net income. So a lot of anything usually after the net income, so sometimes depreciation is listed sometimes in the P&L, sometimes after net operating income. So they said, well, we got to add the depreciation back. I said, okay, then your net income just dropped by the $100,000 that we just added back in. It's a wash, right? And I know, I can see the
Well, I mean,
yes, sir.
Earlier, you mentioned about on EBITDA that affects the multiple for calculation of the
Yes.
valuation versus SDE. What is the net result? Close to are they close? Or?
They are close at a certain level. And then as you get further out, as your business grows, your management costs will increase, but they diverge. It doesn't increase at the same rate. And that's what causes your EBITDA multiple and even your SDE multiple. A business with an SDE of $100,000 versus $400,000 probably is going to go a little higher multiple.
But you're not going to come out with vastly different valuations.
Yeah, not until you're up into a $20 million sale or something like that. Yeah.
At that level, does it make more sense to base it on EBITDA or not necessarily?
At that level, it does. It typically, because that's where your process changes. One of the things that's different with my world, I delete 3 or 4 emails every week. Hi, we're XYZ Group. We're looking for this kind of business, and it's got to have $2 million in EBITDA, and click, it's gone. I just don't even respond to them. When I was trained back earlier days when we had 6 brokers, I would train them. The new broker, I would tell them, if you have a good business, a solid business, and it's priced right, and you have a list of 12 buyers, and you lose that list, you can feel bad about it, but don't worry, because there are always, you can only have one buyer for the business, and there's always, sometimes it gets a little tougher right now with interest rates, but there's still way more buyers, and there can only be one that buys than there are good businesses to sell. Yeah. So we start with the net income, and then we add the owner's salary.
What you said was really interesting. There's more buyers than there are good businesses to sell.
Absolutely.
So if we everybody in this room, made our business an awesome business to sell, you could find a buyer for it.
Yes, with the exception of you're not in Colorado. My advantage is I'm actually part of a national network, so that we can work with somebody in Minneapolis or Alabama or Georgia or whatever, because we have like 150 offices around the world, so, or most of them in the U.S. So theoretically, yes. Just from a licensing standpoint, you'd have to look at that. Where are you from?
Alexandria, Virginia.
Okay. Okay, net income, then the non-cash back items, just like you would in EBITDA, right? You would add back depreciation, amortization. Amortization is essentially think of it as depreciation of an intangible. Right? So if you bought your company, there's goodwill allocated in the purchase price, and you can depreciate that goodwill, and that's called amortization. You're amortizing that part of your loan. Right? And then add backs. We already talked about the Harley Davidson, right? A buyer would be okay with understanding the Harley Davidson doesn't need to be in an underground utility business. The lender may have some issues with it.
I don't understand add backs. You would subtract that from.
No, I would add to. I add it back. So I would, simple example, let's say your net income is $400,000. You paid yourself $120,000. Now our SDE is $520,000. Oh, I notice you're paying your life insurance, IRS. We've got another $40,000 there that will add to your seller's discretionary earnings. Oh, wait a minute, you own the real estate, you're paying yourself less than market, and unless you're gonna put a lease in place for the buyer at less than market, now I have to subtract the difference between that and the fair market that he's going to have to pay, and that'll lower your SDE, right? So, and then it works through. Usually a lot of things like non-business travel, meals, entertainment, that's usually just a wag at 50% of what's, for initial reviews.
Is that because typical business owners are schlepping personal travel expense
Yes.
under the name of
Yes.
doing something for the biz?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And personal vehicles?
Vehicles that are in the company's name that are not required for operations of the business. Yeah, which is very common. There were 2 in the closing on Friday.
I don't see profit sharing on them. Would that fall in?
It doesn't. It's not there. So let me look. So you're talking about your expense as the business owner on sharing profits.
Not our expense, but what we took in. We have profit sharing with our company,
Okay.
and we give our employees X.
Yes.
And then we gave ourselves X pre-tax,
Yes.
and so that's a sizable number.
Yes.
Does that fall under owner's salary? That is a profit.
So yeah, and what you'll see here, and this is a good point. What you see here are more black and white. There's a good deal of gray when it comes to the add backs. And this is one area, for instance, this is similar to bonuses. We see a lot of, companies that'll do bonus, and they say, the owner will say, well, this is totally discretionary. I said, okay, fine. How long have you been given the bonuses? Oh, for the last 10 years. So those employees, I wouldn't add that back, because that's what the employees are used to, and that's part of it become the part of that normal operating business. There are I had a guy, I didn't get the listing because I wouldn't add this back. He had a legal expense for something that was happening. It was granite countertop kind of business, and something went wrong, and he got sued, and there were legal expenses. And he gave me his list of add backs, and he included that on there. And I said, and why is this on this list? He goes, we hardly ever, this, like the first time we've ever gotten sued, or et cetera. I said, okay, so as long as you will sign something that says if there is a lawsuit, you will cover the cost of it, we can add it back. But by saying it's an add back, you're saying it's never going to happen again. And you can't say that in a business, right? So there's a lot of gray areas on that.
And the owner's salary, you really mean owner's salary, any bonus or profit share that you're giving yourself?
Yes, that's coming to you. But the employee piece, would most likely, we look at everything closely, but would most likely leave that in. But it's definitely an owner's benefit.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to figure out or understand is my real profit of the business is what we paid ourselves.
Yeah.
We paid ourselves, the profit sharing amount, so that adds into my owner's salary.
Yes, it does.
And then I do my multiple times 3, and that's the profit of the business.
Yes, that adds into yours. Like I said, though, the question mark is, if you could add back, because some sellers would say, well, that's discretionary. The new buyer of the business doesn't have to do profit sharing. Well, how, if that's been in place and that's what the buyers expect, I would say, yeah, you do.
The profit there, whether I pay it myself or leave it on the books, that amount of money left over at the end of the year after taxes is still the profit. And that's where I'm still going to get my multiple times 3.
If I understand your question correctly, yes.
The other thing that is emerging, I've heard a number of us say it now, 3 times SDE. So things like demonstrated renewable revenue with clients could very well drive up that.
Yes, okay.
3X to 4X.
Exactly. So we're going to go into value range, and where you fall, there's going to be a range, and then where you fall in the range, either higher or lower, depends on several factors. And they're a little different for each business. We see where we're at max. Oh, then the weighted averaging. 3 years is the magic number, and that's what we look at. But we find in reality, and James can correct me if I'm wrong, the focus is kind of shifted to the last 2 years. And you'll see some of that may be COVID driven. But anyway, so what you do by weighting, if you weight, again, weight as in this weight, you're looking at, most typical is 1 time the 3-year-old SDE, 2 times the 2-year-old SDE, 3 times the 1-year-old SDE, and then you divide that number by 6. So that way, what you have is the most of the value is based on the most current period. Okay? Which is why a lot of cases, when we're looking at a business, we will advise, you're going to be better off financially if you wait until next year to do this, because you could drop that 1 year that's really bad. And if you get that out of the equation, and we just do the math, and we just duplicate what you did this year, next year, without even growing it, there's going to be a difference because that low year is dropped out of the weighting.
Now, do a lot of buyers expect to see financials past that 2 to 3 year period, or are they okay with just seeing the last 2 to 3 years?
The majority are 2 to 3 years. Now, what a lot will do now, and it's been a little different, they say, how'd you do during COVID? We want to go back, and I've seen several that'll say, we'll go back. Let's look at before COVID, through COVID, and then current. All right, go through. Yeah, it depends. Some buyers are a lot more sophisticated than others. Some buyers hire help, accounting help. Some buyers just wing it. But yes is the answer to your question.
How does growth, year-over-year growth,
yes,
on a large scale, like 15 to 25%,
yep,
how does that affect?
It's going to push you up in that range. And let's talk about that.
And in our business, I think we talk about gross margin growth versus the top number.
Yeah.
You might be doing a ton of volume, but if your gross margin is thin.
Yes. Well, in one of my final points, we're almost done here. How are we doing on time? Good? Okay. We talked a little bit about growth. It's earnings growth. Is I think what you're just going is what's impactful. So this slide is about once we determine, okay, we agree. We go back and forth. We fight about the fact that you can't add back a lawsuit, cost of defending a lawsuit, and et cetera. We come to some agreement that this is the number. And then we say, okay, let's analyze the other factors that will impact where you fall on this range. And one of those is sales trending. It's a lot easier to sell a business that's growing than it is to sell it when it's in decline. And in a lot of cases, we won't take a listing if the business is in decline until it has at least shown where the bottom is and ideally started its recovery. Because with a buyer, how do they know, what the buyer is, what the where the bottom is, so they could buy into continued further decline, if you base on the value right now. So declining businesses usually only get sold at a discount, and that's, for instance, in Colorado, I've sold business for people whose doctors have told them you need to move to a lower altitude. All right, so one thing I've learned is we're not talking about IBM here. You don't have to answer to stockholders. You are the stockholders. And there's a lot of reasons why people sell businesses and not necessarily at the maximum value if they did X, Y, and Z for the next couple of years. Yeah.
If sales are relatively flat, but margins are increasing, is that more valuable than the sales is?
It is if there's a logical reason for it, right? So, and frankly, if you're really optimizing your business, that should be happening, right? You should be, that's there's two sides. There's the growth side and there's the expense side. So if you're getting more efficient, your systems and processes are, working. Someone left, you were able to hire someone at a lower cost because you had the manual for them to follow, et cetera. Then, the answer to your question is yes.
And you want to do 3 projects a year, take 3 months off.
Yeah. Well, it's like a house, I guess. The renovations of houses, majority of renovations happen the year after it's bought and the year before it's sold. All right, so there's that kind of concept. Those last 2 or 3 years, like I always tell the sellers, don't wait until you're totally burned out and then try to make one last push. And that's what a lot of folks do. Okay, so sales training, owner's role and workload. I had a business where the guy came to me after his heart attack. He dropped down to 70 hours a week. And I told him, I will not list your business unless you allow an allocation for another body in here. And he understood and agreed. I said, I'm not that good. I can't find somebody who's going to be willing to pay what you want and have to work 70 hours a week to maintain it, right? So that wasn't a negative adjustment in his SDE. All right.
What's the expectation of a buyer to have the seller stay on for what period of time?
Yep, and that is in the next slide, which we'll get to, what to expect after the sale. So you're just going to have to wait.
So if you created your business and you have limited daily role and you're doing CEO, is that got a higher value? That's
going to push you up.
So it's right. The multiple's higher.
Yes.
Not the valuation.
So, like I say, some of the factors in, there's a reasonable range, and the range changes based on the size of the SDE. All right, so your higher SDE, your valuation, range of value is going to increase. All right. But within whatever range is applicable for your size of the business, whether you end up on the low end of that range or the high end of that range is impacted by what you just said. Just put yourself in a buyer's shoes.
You're saying multiple or?
No, I'm saying the range of value. So let's just say again, we'll say that, okay, it's $400,000. And based on what I've learned in the process of coming up with that SDE, I found out that you're working 60 hours a week, you don't have any key employees, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say if it was just the opposite, you got this manager's been with you 10 years, he's gung-ho, and you're in that, we call a normal business week 50 hours or something, less than that. If you're at 30, that's even better. That'll push you up higher. So $400,000, let's say, if that value range is probably somewhere between, do quick math, 900 and 1.2, no, a little higher at 400, more like, like 900 and 1 point, let's say you go as far as 4, that'd be stretching it, so maybe 1.5 would be an appropriate value range. It's all approximate, right? Based on and then where you are in that range, based on that SDE, gets factored in the sales trending. We talked about going up and down, the owner's role and workload, which you said that guy at 70 hours a week has definitely pushed him down in the range. So if you're working part-time, that definitely pushes you up towards the top of the range.
If I hear what you're saying, we should be taking several weeks off to go fishing and boating.
That's my advice.
We want the whole picture to be appealing, right? The guy who's come in, he's like, I don't want to work 70 hours. I want a business that functions. I want to take vacations. I want to have a great income.
Yep.
Right?
And the best way to do that is those systems and processes to create that business where you can step away and it can operate without you.
Yeah, 70 hours a week is not a badge of honor.
I had a business when I first started in 1997. I still remember sitting in the office, and it was a tow truck business, and he was the driver and the owner of the business, and it was a husband and wife, and they were doing the interview, and the wife asked, "When's the last time you took a vacation?" 17 years ago. She laserized her husband and said, I could read the thought bubble. I'll kill you if you buy this business. Because the guy he hadn't gone on vacation in 17 years. So that was a short meeting. But you don't want to do it for the sake of doing it. You want to create a business that allows you to do it, right? And that's the systems and processes. Customer concentration, probably not a big issue for you guys, but there's a difference. Put yourself in the buyer's shoes. Business has a $500,000 SDE. One client makes up 40% of the revenue. The other business with a $500,000 SDE, this biggest client makes up 12%. Where are you going? Right? And you will definitely have to pay more because this is all, by the way, I'm sorry, the appraisal stuff comes to me. If you caught me when I said the multiple is the mathematical inversion of a capitalization rate. Part of a capitalization rate that gets built in is risk. So this is all about risk, risk assessment and placement on buyer or seller. And it's a lot riskier for a buyer to buy a business with a 40% concentration issue than it is with 10 or 12, even if it has the same earnings. All right? And so as a result, they may not have ever heard of capitalization rate, but they're gonna increase that capitalization rate. And if you do the mathematical inversion, that means it's a lower multiple that they're gonna pay for your business because of that risk. Even if they don't know how to term it, they're doing it, right? Because they're looking across the market. I always tell people, where the comparison comes in, and most sellers that come to us don't know. They have no idea what their business is worth. That wasn't part of the equation. They've been busy building their business. And when we tell them, this is this, and like, that's way too. I just had a guy contact me that called me like 2 years ago, and I gave him the valuation where it was. He told me I was nuts, that he could sell it for almost twice that. He just called me again this year. He hadn't sold it, right? That's where the market comes in. I always try to explain it to sellers who are overambitious on their, want to be on their asking prices. I said, if you're a buyer looking at 3 homes, all with the same features, and this one's worth 600, this one's worth 600, and this one's worth 900, and this one's worth 600, you're not looking at 4 houses anymore, you're looking at 3. So an active buyer shopping the market, they have an idea of what multiples are and what they're looking at, right?
Can I ask a dumb question, I guess? So if you get your house in order, your business, and you reduced your role to get it for sale, why sell it?
It's a great question, and that's, if we go back to that first meeting, that's one of the things I really want to know. Because this business I just sold, that was the biggest question. This guy was working maybe 10 hours a week. And his SDE was 1.2 million. Like, why in the world would you want? It's time for him. He was in that. He's been in that industry in different capacities for almost 40 years. So it was just, it's time. And his son was in the business, so he had some personal reasons tied to that. He felt he was holding his son back and wanted to give some opportunities. But like I said, you're not selling IBM. You don't have to explain your reasoning to the shareholders. A lot of times, it's honey, or you think it's the right time. We want to spend more time with the grandkids or whatever, or I've got one right now who's really trying to sell. He's got a good business. He wants too much for it, but he's got an opportunity today he thinks is better. And one of the construction companies I sold was for that very reason. Yeah.
If you're really that independent of the business, then you're reliant on a good GM or an executive, and hopefully they're being compensated well, but there's always that business risk that they make some bad decisions and it nosedives, or bank notes and some of these other things that have to be signed that you're personally obligated to. Those kind of contingent liabilities, I guess, weigh in.
Mm-hmm. Sure. The key personnel is big. This last business I bought, because I'm not magical, I only have 24 hours in the day, already had a manager in place. And so that definitely impacted the decision to buy it. And I put somebody in there with him anyway, in case he decided to leave to do that. But that was factored into it. Key personnel, it's great. And a lot of times these key personnel, they may be your buyers. We talk about grooming the buyers. I don't know, David, if you've ever gotten into this with like phantom stock.
That's right after lunch. You're giving me a good lead.
Okay, there you go. Here's your softball. There you go.
And do you do many deals where the key personnel have an incentive bonus for staying on?
Stay bonuses.
Stay bonus.
We call it stay bonus, and we typically see and we advise it's split between buyer and seller. So it's a thank you from the seller, and it's a thank you from the buyer for sticking around. And it's usually 1 year for the stay bonus.
How does the buyer come up with that? Do they consider that part of the buying cost? So would that come away from them? Because then you really want to be split if you did that.
No, not usually. Most of what we're doing, is call it in the $1 million to $2 million range. Each side, we're not talking, because the last thing you want to do is give them a $100,000 stay bonus so they can go out and start their own business, right? So we're talking, usually lower numbers than that,
I guess my question is, when the buyer's buying that, and they're on the hook for that 50%, that's over and above what they paid
Correct.
the seller.
Yeah, that doesn't play into valuation. It's usually not discussed until you're well past the LOI stage, because the sellers don't have to do it, but most do, because they are thankful, especially those key employees.
Reduces a risk.
5 minutes. I thought you were
No, I think you got a
he's
question.
raising his hand. I'm like,
Yeah, this
5
time I'd raise my hand.
Is
yeah.
the code?
So really, here we go. Solid company,
Yeah.
construction company, good history, good financials, documented systems, processes,
Yeah.
stable management team. In broad terms, what might be the multiple when you look at construction, if you can generalize that?
Give me
what would
the
be the
earnings.
multiple you're looking at?
What's the dollar amount of the SDE?
Well, now you're asking me questions.
Just answer.
Because that impacts them.
$500,000.
$500,000, you would, so I know one that you're thinking of, and it's super organized and has here's another thing. It's not listed up here. The one that I think you're talking about is booked well through 2024.
Yep.
So that one's pushing a 4, I would say.
All right, so a well-run company, pushing 4,
Yeah.
so maybe a $2 million price, loosely speaking, to be negotiated, must be a win-win.
Absolutely. But we have, so because of the growth that we have, we're putting most of the weight, instead of on a 3-year average, the bank's going to make sure they can debt service based on at least the last 2 years. James, correct me when I'm wrong. But having that, as long as there's no concentration issues, having that backlog, we have every reason to think that this growth is going to continue based on the business. The buyer will take on operating risk, but as long as we have that trend and everything to show that the trend should continue, that's where we'll push for something higher, like and 4 would be very aggressive on that. But we list businesses, and this one that I just sold that was similar, and we tell them. So one question that's maybe in the key last slide is, how long does this process typically take? And the answer is 9 months, but on average. So these companies are what I call, they're growing into their value. So if I said 4 now, it may be hard to sell it at 4, but as it continues to grow, as long as the seller doesn't say, okay, I want to push it up now to this, now it's really a 3.8, and as it's growing, so you're growing into that value.
Okay.
So it would be an aggressive value today at $2 million.
Hopefully I didn't miss this, but at what point do you ask for earnest money? And what's a good, reasonable amount to ask?
Yes. Earnest money is usually included in the LOI, okay? Included in, as well as, I mentioned the no-shop provision, that's the buyer's protection there. Now the downside, but every seller hates, is that earnest money is refundable if that buyer finds anything wrong in due diligence. There's a list of the contingencies. If they can't get an acceptable loan because of the rate, if the lease they can't get an acceptable lease, then it is refundable. Now, the difference there, the one in October 1st, is that buyer wanted to push out the closing. He had a non-compete that was coming up to expiring. So we essentially negotiated that deal in July, August timeframe. With an October 1st, we requested a non-refundable deposit. In that case, it's a $700,000 deal, and this guy has $70,000 in my escrow account that if he doesn't close on the 1st, that goes, he forfeits that.
A rule of thumb for what you ask for or something?
Yeah, it's gotten less So in the early years doing this, every deal had a earnest money deposit. Going forward, I would say 70% do, not all of them anymore, because it is refundable. But we usually shoot, it's not even a percentage. We'll look at, depending on the size of the business, 10, or the one I just closed, we had a $25,000 earnest money deposit. Yeah.
What is broker fee on these deals?
We'll talk about that later quietly. Yeah, 1 second. The way we do it, ours is 10% on the first $1 million in sale, 8% on the second, 6% on the third, and then 5% thereafter. And that's fairly standard.
In the event of owner financing, what happens in the event of a default?
Depends how it's structured, right? If it's full owner financing, and if there's collateral in it, then it's subject to the collateral. If it's not, if it's just personal guarantee, you get the business back. It's probably not what you want. Oh no. One of the things, I know I'm probably outdated. You can talk to James from a lender standpoint, but I've only had in 26 years like 2 or 3 businesses where that happened, at least within like 3 or 4 years of sales. There may be some longer after that I'm not aware of. And I know in at least 2 out of those 3 cases, the lender called me because they didn't lend 100% of the value of the business. They got the down payment. So for them to be whole, the business could be sold for a lower amount, and the bank does not want to come in and run your remodeling company. They're not going to take somebody off the teller station and give them a hammer. It's just, they don't want to do that. So they tend to be cooperative if there's a potential solution. That's the way it used to work. James can update. Thankfully, it's not a common situation. Okay. And I think realistic growth opportunities. Oh, that's my final point slide. I say realistic. I learned a long time ago when I would interview people, and they've been in business for 20, 30 years, and I say, Fred, if you were 20 years younger and you knew what you know now, what would you do? And he go, oh, we would do this, we would do that, we would do this, we would do that. And then you ask the inevitable question, well, why aren't you doing that? And the answer is some form of a pained look, like, it means I have to change. I do golf every Thursday with the guys. They just don't want to do it. But, if a buyer can see that, oh yeah, that's why the businesses I bought, the average age of the sellers were sitting in the 70s. They knew they weren't optimizing their business. They were coasting. So, realistic growth opportunities will push you a little bit up in that range. It's not a big impact on value, but it is. There was a study done years ago that 70% of the buyer's decision whether or not to buy a business was based on whether or not they thought it had good growth opportunities. Because no one's going to buy, I think I'll buy your business and do my best to keep it right where it's at. That's not why they're buying it. Almost every buyer, they're going to have debt that you probably don't have on the acquisition, so their goal is to at least grow it enough to cover that debt to be able to get to the earnings level that you were at that we sold it for, right? And on the last...
Is there any correlation between the SDE and the multiplier, meaning like if the SDE is lower or higher?
Yes. Higher SDE, higher multiple.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yep. And then I think we're at last. Okay. Yep. What to expect after the sale. This is most common. A smart buyer is going to be, very good at how he relate. I'm patting myself on the back here, but I don't want to pat my chest because it makes a noise. So one of the businesses I bought 3 years ago, that seller and I are getting together for coffee this week. You know, and it's up to, I say a smart buyer, it's up to the buyer to maintain that relationship. Because here's what's common, you know, is 30 to 45 days and then a couple of months of, we used to say phone fax, but nobody faxes anymore. So, you know, phone, text, or email consultation. But if you manage that relationship, one of the other businesses I bought, he came in last week and says, I'm thinking about, you need somebody in sales? Right? So, you know, a smart buyer is going to maintain those relationships. You don't want it to be, you know, when the seller sees your number on the phone that they, you know, we'll maybe get back to them later. Right? So here's the transition. Oh, there's final points after this. Sorry. This is what's most common. What I mean by a soft transition is typically best is this isn't a restaurant where you put a banner up on the building under new management. It's just the opposite. You know, the clientele is used to seeing Joe's face, and you don't want them tomorrow to see Bob's face. Who's this? What is that? So a soft transition is you get the clientele to see both Joe and Bob now, and then eventually Joe starts fading out and Bob starts taking over. That's the more, in most cases, that's the better way to do it. Again, 90% rules. There's exceptions to everything I've said today. So, last one. The question I get a lot is, when should we tell our employees that we're selling? And our answer is about 1 hour after you leave the closing table. And everything's signed. And the reason for this is not to be deceptive or anything, but it's just people's imaginations run, and they've heard stories where companies sell and the new buyer came in, cleared everybody out, put their people in, and in these cases, that may happen, you know, at a higher level, you know, where there's strategic buyers, et cetera. But one of the buyer's biggest fears is that the employees are going to leave, right? And the employees' fears are that the buyer's going to want to get rid of them, right? So what we typically see and we typically advise is the meeting, you know, the Friday afternoon closing and, you know, the Monday morning meeting. Sometimes the buyer's there at the beginning. Sometimes they show up 30 minutes later where the seller explains what happened and promotes the buyer. You know, hey, some of you I know aren't surprised because we're 70 years old and we're going to retire sooner or later. Others, you know, other situations are different. But, you know, for personal reasons, we've decided to sell the business, and we found Jack. And, you know, here's, in general, this is why we think Jack's going to be a great fit for the business. You know, we've gotten to know him for the last 3 months over the process of doing this. He's got a related background. He's better at sales than I am as the seller, blah, blah, blah. He's interested in growing. You know, we've been coasting. A lot of you are excited about growing and benefiting from that growth, etc. And then Jack shows up and, you know, hi guys, I've kind of learned about you in this process, you know, discussing it with the seller, and, you know, I'm really looking forward to working with you guys going forward, getting to know you. I have plans. I want to grow the business, but first I need to understand it, and that comes from you guys because you're the experts. I hope to learn from you, ... That's what we see in general. 90% rules is the better way to do it, and that's what I call a soft transition. Oh, or when you tell your employees. Average time to sell, we already said 9 months. Retainers, commission rates. We already talked about our commission rates. Retainers, that's interesting. I'll say this level, meaning, you know, businesses that are selling $2 to $3, $4 million, you shouldn't have to pay a retainer, right? You don't have to. Now, my time in the investment banking world, when we're looking at $20 million, $30 million, is very common to pay a retainer there. Different rules. They have different processes for how they would sell, etc. And they have usually a team involved in doing this, etc.
What's the average retainer in that?
Oh, geez, it's been a while since I've done it, but it depends on the size of the business. I've seen, I was with the investment banking I was with here in Denver. They were pretty aggressive. They would ask for equity in the business going forward or that kind of thing as well. Some would do it and some wouldn't. Most wouldn't, but never hurt, from their point of view, never hurt to ask, right? So a lot of times it would be broken up, just a 10 grand kind of thing, not 100 grand. And then for a certain period, because they're going to research the industry, they're going to target specific buyers, which is different than the process at our level, where we basically expose and let the industry, let potential buyers come to us. So what they would do is typically do like 10 grand maybe every 3 months or something until it's sold. The concept is to offset costs, etc. But not a huge amount, unless you're a much bigger. But why using, this is just call that pet peeve. People say, well, it's, I've heard it's, 4 times my revenue. I hate revenue models, because you're saying that 2 businesses that are doing $3 million in sales are worth the exact same. One business, the earnings may be $400,000, the other one may be $750,000, and you're telling me they're the same value? No, it's based on the adjusted earnings, whether you're looking at SDE or EBITDA. Okay, so I believe that's the last slide, and I'm overheated up here, so yep, that's it. Okay.